when we've been consistently in a fight or flight state or in some kind of activated nervous system state, it's in our body. So I love the idea of your cravings or your disordered eating or your binge eating or emotional eating is actually there as a protective measure. I've had, my own journey with eating. And just being, growing up in the 90s and 2000s and with diet culture being thrown in my face and looking at magazines and MTV culture and being in the performing arts, there was so much pressure to fit in a certain way. And I had this constant feeling of, if I could just get this shit under control, then I'm going to have it made. And I could never kind of just get it right. So it's almost like it's one diet away, which is this very hopeful feeling, right? It would give me that rush of maybe this time. If I can just get it this time, then the path forward will kind of reveal itself.
Welcome to How Did You Get Here? I'm your host, Maya Kruger, and I am thrilled to have Stephanie Mara on the podcast today. Stephanie is the founder of the Somatic Eating method and a leading voice in the field of disordered eating, specifically binge eating recovery. This conversation goes very, very deep. We explored the very good reasons that we binge and how all food and body behaviors are a direct response to the state of our nervous system. If you've ever struggled with body image or eating, which is probably most of us, this one is for you. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Stephanie Mara.
I would love for our listeners and viewers to hear a little bit about your method. Somatic eating, what does that mean?
Yeah. So first, for anyone who is new, I always kind of laugh to myself because I feel like I'm so immersed in the somatic field that it feels like everyone knows about somatics now. But I know that somatic psychology is really new to a lot of people. And so if we see that just first the word somatic, so somatic means relating to the body distinct from the mind. And for a really long time, most therapeutic modalities were kind of more of that top-down approach. If we address the thoughts in our head, we can change the way we express ourselves in our lives. Somatics is more of a bottom-up approach. So we are utilizing felt sense. We are paying attention to emotions and sensations. We are building our capacity to be in our body and to receive feedback from our body through symptoms, through sensations, through emotions, to then change how we think. What we know now is about 80% of communication comes from our body up to our brain. So even the thoughts that we're thinking can be information for how we are feeling. So what I found over the years, because I've been in the field of supporting individuals with disordered eating and eating disorders for almost like 15 years now, that
as a clinician.
Yes. So along the way, let's see, I first was fascinated with psychology and have been studying psychology for a very long time. That took me more into the mind-body connection, just with my own history in having to do a lot of healing, both in relationship with food and body. But really what I found on my own journey was it was all a response to past trauma. And so what I found is that food was trying to help me self-regulate, and so was my body image. And if I could just try to, get these things under control, then maybe I would feel a sense of safety in my body. But obviously, food and body image, when you try to tack on a sense of safety to something that is constantly shifting and changing, you never get to feel a salient sense of safety in your body. I didn't know this until much, much, much later when I started diving into the field of somatics. So I found first, I studied a lot about nutrition, became, a health coach and an eating psychology coach, and was really kind of focused on the nutritional piece. But the more that I worked with people around their relationship with food, the more I found that someone can know what to eat, but there's something else that is happening in their body around why they eat, what they eat, when they eat, how much they eat. And it's much more nuanced and complicated than we give it credit for. And a lot of people over the years started coming to me practicing intuitive eating and kept saying it's not working for me. And they felt like a failure, and they felt shame that this thing that had a gold star next to it of this is the path forward to try to heal your relationship with food wasn't working for them. And what I found, which was been creating kind of somatic eating for, over a decade now, is that one, if someone's listening to this and intuitive eating worked for them, fantastic. I'm so glad. I never want to diminish that there is a modality out there for every single person on this planet, and it's a matter of finding what works for you. But a lot of the people that came to me were experiencing past trauma. And there's a lot of things about intuitive eating that it's not a trauma-informed approach, and it's a neurotypical approach. So if you are navigating some kind of neurodivergence in your body and your brain, it's not a modality that is necessarily going to work for you. What we know
Can you say more about the neurodivergence?
Yeah,
the neurodivergence
absolutely.
in the body. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So, let's say you're someone on the spectrum of autism or ADHD. We know that your body and brain are not really getting the amount of dopamine that maybe a neurotypical person is receiving in their bodies. This is why I always kind of like to normalize when people come to me and they're like, I don't get why my friend can just eat a square of chocolate and they just move on in their day and not eat the entire bar of chocolate. And I'm like, well, they're eating that chocolate in an entirely different body. And that can be a body that is getting enough dopamine. That can be a body that had secure attachment growing up. That can be a body that is living more in the parasympathetic nervous system of safety and connection. So they're not having the same response in their body to that square of chocolate than you're having in your body. So someone who has experienced past trauma or is navigating neurodivergence, that one, you may have less circulating dopamine. So here, when we go into the tenet of intuitive eating, of listen to your hunger and fullness cues, that's really, really, really hard to do. And you're going to eat a square of chocolate and your body's going to be like, oh, dopamine. Love this stuff. Eat more of that.
Right.
Don't stop eating that. Never stop eating that. And so you're just going to have a very different response to that. Not that it's wrong, not that there's anything wrong with you, not that you're broken and something needs to be fixed. We kind of have to learn what is the body that you are working with so that we can find a way of eating in a relationship with food that really works for your unique body. But what I also find that it is with my work with somatic eating, the groundwork of my work is creating more safety in the body. And we kind of have to start there, that if we are always living in more of the sympathetic nervous system of fight or flight, it is really natural and normal to have a lot of cravings. And cravings for very specific foods. And I really actually like to normalize that. I find that diet culture or wellness culture a lot of the time demonize cravings. There's something to get over or to fight, or there's something else that you should be eating if you have a craving, and kind of this really toxic messaging, rather than cravings are body information. They're trying to communicate something to you and they're never going to go away. So when you move into the sympathetic nervous system, it makes sense that you would want foods that are higher in things like simple carbohydrates and sugar, because it is giving you the quick form of glucose that your body needs when it perceives that it's running away from a perceived threat all day, every day. And we get to see the wisdom in that. Not that it's oh, I have a problem with sugar. It's no, your body is telling you it's scared, it's depleted, it needs this sugar to continue to fight or flee from this perceived threat. And until we kind of actually focus on the physiology and the nervous system and what's happening in your body, you're going to continue to receive these very strong messages about what to eat and how much. And I work with a lot of people who are navigating patterns of binge eating and emotional eating and overeating. And what I find is that we have to focus actually less on what's happening with food and see the wisdom in what is your body trying to communicate through this food behavior and these food impulses.
I love the idea of the body being wise in the sense that it's not coming to get you. I've been a clinician for almost 10 years now, and I specialize in trauma. And what I love about your approach is it's very consistent with the way that we address CPTSD with women, specifically with women, which is the bottom up, right? The body up. Because we think about PTSD or trauma and it's more there's this big event trauma with a capital T, and then we have to do some processing around that, and somehow we will get over it. When we've been consistently in a fight or flight state or in some kind of activated nervous system state, it's in our body. We don't recognize a different way of being. So I love the idea of your cravings or your disordered eating or your binge eating or emotional eating is actually there as a protective measure. You've kind of created these parts, if we're kind of thinking IFS, as a way to get you through the world when it hasn't been safe to. So there are like so many threads that I want to pull on here. I've had, my own journey with eating and just being, growing up in the 90s and 2000s and with diet culture being thrown in my face and looking at magazines and MTV culture and being in the performing arts, there was so much pressure to fit in a certain way. And I had this constant feeling of, if I could just get this shit under control, then I'm going to have it made. And I could never kind of just get it right. So it was almost like it's one diet away, which is this very hopeful feeling, right? It would give me that rush of maybe this time. If I can just get it this time, then the path forward will kind of reveal itself. And now I'm a mother of 2 daughters, and I am terrified of them being exposed to any of this crap. And also knowing that it's inevitable. They're going to be exposed. My daughter is 5, and she laid on the floor and said, like this, I'm really skinny. And my whole body was like, what did you just say? Where did you hear that? And I had this moment of really understanding she's going to be hearing things like this throughout her life. And I can only try to kind of build her up so that it doesn't seep in as much as it kind of sunk into myself. So I guess if we're thinking about, binge eating or emotional eating as a form of taking care of ourselves and looking at it almost like a loving voice, what do you think that is trying to accomplish for us? If I'm binge eating on a food that makes me physically ill, what am I actually doing for myself?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I also just really hear you in that because as a culture, we have not been able to move away yet from that our body's appearance means something about ourselves. We are all immersed in swimming in the sea of diet culture and weight stigma and thin privilege. And so until we get to a place where we can see that bodies will all express themselves in different ways based off of our lived experiences and our genetics and all sorts of different things, and that all bodies are welcomed here. Yeah, we kind of have to do a lot of educating for younger generations around these messages that they will hear and like how to create such strength and inner resiliency to say, no, I don't accept that. That is not a message that I am going to receive and take into this body. And it does take a lot of work and a lot of reminding. And so I do like to normalize, I work with a lot of parents as well, that it's like, how do we work with children around, you are going to hear these messages and here's where they come from and here's what they mean and here's how you can reject them. and sometimes,
so how do you reject it?
Yeah. So, first, to answer your first question around what is binge eating doing for us. So, first off, there's a lot of things that binge eating is trying to tell us. And usually I like to, in my work with somatic eating and what I learned in ultimately getting my master's degree in somatic psychology, and I'm currently getting my PhD in somatic psychology as well, is that our body, when we are struggling with food, is living in a dysregulated state. And so, as you were even referencing, we're more in that fight or flight response, and that this can be from, big T or little t past trauma. And what happens is that the body moves into a fight or flight response. And there, our digestion shuts down. Our blood moves away from our digestive tract to fight or flee. We have very specific food cravings and desires to continue to be able to have the energy and the resources to continue being in that state, because living in a dysregulated state all day, every day can also be depleting nutritionally and emotionally. So this is why also, binge eating can come in for a lot of different reasons. One piece can be, let's go with physically, is that when you are getting nutritionally depleted because you're living in a trauma response, you need a lot more nutrition to stabilize yourself. And when you are in diet culture or kind of in the binge restrict cycle, your body keeps getting scared of, am I going to get the nutrition I need to survive this? And so sometimes binge eating comes in to get a lot more nutrition into the body. In that realm, I usually, with those that I work with one-to-one, I like to call it more protective eating. It's actually protecting you, especially if you're not eating enough and you are restricting your intake. Like, it makes sense that your body's going to take over at some point and make sure that you get the food that you need to survive. So physically, that's one piece. Emotionally, when we aren't being met, seen, heard, held the way we need it to be, and we're looking for some sense of safety and security, like, one food can become a replacement for secure attachment. And this is where I also like to bring in so much compassion for people who maybe you're in a place of a lot of self-shame and judgment, that it's like, why do I keep eating these foods? A lot of the times, the term these days is hyperpalatable foods. And so if we just see the things that are a little bit more like prepackaged and processed and all of that stuff, that these foods, they taste the same every single time. They're consistent.
There's something
They're
so
reliable.
comforting about the predictability. Yeah.
Yes. So it's the same body experience of secure attachment. I know that it's going to be there for me. I can rely on this. It's going to be consistent. I can come to expect this experience and what it's going to be like. And we're really, really wise as kids when we're not getting that secure attachment from our parents. We find another way to do that. And sometimes that's where food comes in to create that security. When we lack safety from our environment, this can come from experiences like if you actually had food scarcity or were living in a food desert growing up, when, there was fighting over meals, when your food intake was controlled. I have a lot of people that I work with that talk about how their parents put them on a diet at a really young age. So that can be kind of food trauma in itself, but it doesn't always have to do with food. Like in your work, when you experience traumatic experiences, can run the gamut of all sorts of different things. And I'm sure you probably talk about here of that it's not necessarily about the event, but how your body processed the event. And so, it's like, okay, if your body didn't know that you were going to feel safe, you were going to have co-regulation with the people around you, that is processed as traumatic in your body as an event that was too much, too fast, or too little for too long. And that's where also food, either I find it can go one of two ways. One, it can numb us out. We can just dissociate with food. We can have a good feeling experience with food because food is effective at making us feel good. We don't have to deny that. It's very effective in what it does in our body. So that's one piece. But the other piece that I have found with those that I work with is that sometimes it's actually gives you more of an experience that it's safe to come into your body just for that experience of eating. When you don't feel safe to be in your body at any point of time in the day. And, when you feel like you are always giving to everyone else around you. Maybe you were a child who also was, parentified really young, where you stepped into an adult role way before you were meant to. Food kind of becomes this really fun, playful place where it feels safe to be in your body and you can play when that isn't happening in anywhere else in your life. So it also becomes an experience of solitude, of I get to put myself first. This can be fun and playful, eating whatever I want to eat and how much I want to eat it. And so it kind of depends upon the person. I never like to, make stereotypes or, generalizations around what this could be because it's so unique to the individual and your lived experience. But of the things that I've listed so far, we can see that it's not necessarily about the binging that it means there's something wrong with you. It's wow, you were so wise as a kiddo to figure out that food could do something for you. And as an adult, we just get to build onto your sense of resources. And I always like to call it kind of food and. We never want to take food off of your list of options. It's always there for you. It's your choice. There's nothing morally value wrong around choosing food when you don't need it. It's okay. But sometimes what can happen is when we start to struggle with food is when it becomes our only sole resource to regulate and to feel safe. So it's kind of like food and let me build onto my resources so I feel like I have other choices that when I don't feel safe, there are other things that I know I can lean on to help myself come back into contact with my body and support it through that lack of safety.
So this concept of safety, and I love what you just described about kind of thinking about it as resourceful, right? Turning to food at some point made the most sense and probably kept you alive and afloat in many ways. What does safety mean? Because I think that's such a kind of like an elusive term when it comes to what does it mean? I'm safe. I'm in a house. I'm working. I mean, what does safety mean?
Absolutely. It's become such a popularized term. And I do like to normalize that when we're talking about safety, I find that safety is the present embodied moment to moment experience, because when we step out of the moment to moment experience, we do live in an unsafe world. Anything can happen at any point in time. We don't have to get into politics right now, but like the political landscape right now is leaving a lot of people
Absolutely.
feeling very unsafe. The world in general, like we just went through a pandemic, like a lot of people are still recovering from living in very traumatic times. So I find that when we're talking about safety, and I want to add on that if you are marginalized, oppressed, experience racism, anti-Semitism, all sorts of, weight stigma, we live in a world for a lot of people's bodies that doesn't facilitate a sense of safety for you to actually feel like it is safe to be here. And so, this is where also when we're talking about safety, I like to break it down the moment to moment experience of safety can, on a body sense, if we come into the somatic experience of safety, what that is usually there's a sense of ground. There's a sense of ease. It feels like you can think clearly. There's not a sense of I have to go, 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 go. It feels like you can slow down and savor the moment. You can hear your hunger and fullness cues a lot more easily when you are in an experience of safety. You're going to have less cravings when you are in an experience of safety. And so, when we're talking about safety, it's more about what facilitates a sense of self-connection rather than disconnection. When we are feeling safe, it feels okay to inhabit our body. And when we don't feel safe, that's where a lot of coping mechanisms will come in. That's where we may tend to dissociate. That's maybe where we start to experience symptoms or behaviors that we know don't ultimately bring us the felt sense of safety that we're looking for long term, but they often do momentarily. So like eating food is going to bring momentary safety, but it's not going to give the long-term safety that someone is looking for, where afterwards they feel more connected to themselves, more ease in their body. They feel more spacious in their system. So these are kind of all things that we'll feel when we are experiencing safety. And that can be, if anyone's listening to this, if you look outside a window right now and look at the sky or hear if there's birds tweeting outside or look at a tree, and like, even as I describe that, because I have like a big tree outside my window here, so I like know that it's over there. I feel a sense of like, you could even notice my words are starting to slow down. I feel like an expansion in my chest. I feel some warmth. I even notice that the energy in my body starts to kind of go down into my body, and I can like feel my feet on the floor. Whereas when I'm like kind of teaching or talking, I'm a little bit more in my head. My words start to speed up. My energy is kind of high. That's like probably a little bit more of a sympathetic activation. Not that that's bad. Sympathetic, if we see it rather than fight or flight, it's more the state of mobilization. And sometimes binge eating, just to come back to what it's also doing for us, a lot of people think that it's always to like shut themselves down, to like kind of collapse, to numb out. But for other people, sometimes it's a way to mobilize, that when you're already feeling depressed, collapsed, frozen, stuck, and you're like trying to get out of that and feel like you're done being there, eating really quickly and a lot of foods that are very stimulating can be a way to mobilize back to hopefully a sense of safety to be like, I can move forward. I can run. I can get out of this threat. And so sometimes food is also trying to help us do that. So that, I hope that answers your question of like, this is kind of the felt sense of safety that, yeah, we're kind of trying to find that sense of internal peace and connection and at co-regulation with something. And sometimes food becomes that place that we try to find safety. But really what brings more long-term safety are things like connecting with people that make us feel seen and understood and held, are things like physical movements that feel nourishing to be in our body in movement, things like, having hobbies that light you up and work that makes you feel purposeful and relationships that you love being around. That's going to bring more of this like long-term safety that we're looking to have.
Yeah.
And it can also be really scary. Just want to name that as well. When you've maybe relied on food for this experience for so long that it's not going to feel safe to move away from that initially. And I always like to normalize that when you've spent more time in kind of that sympathetic fight or flight response, that when you start to try to facilitate safety in your body, it's not going to feel safe to feel safe. Because it's not something that your body knows how to stay in, because it's kept you for a reason in more of that sympathetic response for maybe decades of your life.
I'm imagining there's also an amount of grief that comes up in this work for people when they realize how long they've been in survival mode, and even maybe they don't even know what a sense of safety is, right? So how do you teach someone to feel something they've never felt?
Yeah, it's a great question. And what I often find in the field of somatics is that a lot of practitioners are going straight towards the thing that feels the most intense to be with first. And when the only thing that we're checking in with in our body is our racing heart, is a tight chest, is tense shoulders, is a contracted belly, is shallow breathing, why would we want to check in with the body?
Yeah, it sucks to be in the body in that moment. I don't want to be there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
So what I find is that when we're first starting to do somatic work, which is again relating to the body, that we want to actually connect with a more neutral experience initially. So even for those who are listening, if you bring your attention to the tip of your nose or your elbows or your kneecaps, and then just like notice what it feels there. I usually come to the tip of my nose, and it's just like, if I didn't bring my attention to the tip of my nose, I wouldn't even know I had a nose. Like, I know I have a nose, like intellectually, but like I don't have a lot of sensation there. But when I bring my attention to my nose and it feels totally neutral there, it actually turns the volume down internally on any other spots that may be feeling tight or tense or contracted, because I'm guiding my attention towards a completely neutral experience. This is also an experience that you're having in your body. I also like to do this with people who are struggling with their body image. Sometimes we focus so much on the parts of our body that we have a difficulty with being with, that you have a whole other parts of your body that you can be paying attention to. You don't always have to be paying attention to the parts of your body that actually feel quite activating and triggering to be in relationship with. So even if you can find a part of your body, like your nose, your eyebrows, your earlobes, that is like totally neutral, where it's like, yeah, I actually don't really have a very strong judgment or internal criticism or story about my ears. And then notice what that feels like. It starts to kind of give you a very different experience of what it's like to be in relationship with your body and the felt sense of it. From there, we can kind of start to also notice experiences that feel good. Because a lot of the times, especially if you have an experience of past trauma, it's always about what has felt dangerous, what has felt threatening. Your body is always scanning for potential threat. And it keeps you in a kind of a hypervigilant state, also for a good reason. When things legitimately didn't feel safe, you always needed to be on edge to be like, what's going to happen next? Am I okay? And so we sometimes have to start to balance that out with intentionally picking up what can be called like cues of safety. I know some people, the term glimmers have gotten super popular, which comes from the work of
Yeah.
Dev Dana. And so, we want to intentionally pick up things that help us feel safe. And again, that doesn't have to be complicated or difficult or, this huge experience of safety. It could be a shape. It could be a color. It could be an object. If you have an animal who lives in your home, a cue of safety for me is my dog. Love him endlessly. And I snuggle him throughout the day. And he is a cue of safety for me. And so, even you can do this at any point in time when you're driving down a street, when you get to, if you work in an office, when you get to a doctor's appointment, sometimes these things can start to activate our system and we can kind of look out for what also feels safe right now. And it could be music that's playing. It could be the way the sun is shining that day. It could be looking at people's faces around you and seeing somebody smile or laugh. So it can be really, really, really small. And I find that that's a great place to start when you're starting to try to have a relationship with your body is first neutrality, and then starting to pick up little tiny moments that feel good so that we're starting to update that the only time that you're checking in with your body isn't when you feel bad or feel an intensity of some of the emotions that maybe feel harder to be with, like anger and sadness and despair and all of these other things. If we're only paying attention to that experience in our body, we're going to continue to struggle in wanting to be in our body. And so we have to also update the body story that it's safe to connect with it and that it's safe to be in it.
Okay. I'm connecting the dots in my head right now. And I also want to kind of thread this to the idea of we don't just live in the body that we were given, right? We come with this kind of generational pattern or genetics, or our family history. I'm Jewish, so there's this story of Jews all over l'chaim, but all of our holidays they tried to kill us, they couldn't, let's eat, right? There's this story about food for us. I mean, Ashkenazi food's not that great, it's all kind of gray, but you know what? It's part of like our culture, right? Yeah. There's something so comforting about it. Like you said, the secure attachment, which I really loved about, what you're getting. I know that for this holiday, I'm getting this food. It's attached to certain memories, to people that we love, hopefully. But there's also this idea of scarcity. And I mean, all the imitations of old Jewish women is, God forbid you should be hungry. You should constantly be eating. When you host people, you want them to be nauseatingly full. It's almost like a pride point for the hostess or host. So how do we have a healthy, normal, safe relationship with food when it's also tied to a family history, which has beautiful things in it, like culture and tradition, and also trauma and persecution and scarcity?
Yeah, it's, again, such a great question. And, some of the research shows that actually I believe it's the third generation. So you have a person who is in the Holocaust, and then 3 generations later are more likely to have an eating disorder. And so, we get to see that it doesn't just have to be the Holocaust. I know that's kind of most of the research that I've read, but we get to see that generational trauma and that, having an experience in your family's lineage that didn't support you and feeling safe to be in your body and to be here, like that gets passed down from generation to generation. And it starts actually in the mother's womb. And so some of the research that I've been doing for my PhD is how much our autonomic nervous system starts to be shaped by the feedback that we're getting from our mother's body. If we are growing in our mother's body, who is predominantly living in the sympathetic nervous system, it shapes the way that the child's nervous system is created. And so you can actually come out here in the world. This is kind of like how generational trauma keeps getting passed down a little bit, just one factor of it. But you can come out into this world already feeling like, is it safe to be here? Like all the messages I've been receiving in the womb is like, I don't know if it's safe to be here. Like my mom's been kind of telling me through her nervous system information that like I should kind of be on edge from the moment you make it out here earthside. So, this is also why we can see food as a way to, food can also be a way that generational trauma is passed down through, if there was a lineage of food scarcity. And, then you see great, great, great grandparents and they were hoarding food and keeping stockpiles of food in their home. And then their kids see that and they're like, oh, that's just what you do. You always have to have a backup. And then that gets passed down and that gets passed down. And we see it also through, if you have a fear of feeling hungry, that we just get to invite in a lot of curiosity around that of like, where did you learn that hunger was something to be feared? Because that wasn't something that you just came out being like, I think hunger, that's a bad thing. Like you were taught that through your environment and how people interacted with you in hunger. And we do see that a lot in Jewish cultures in that, it's always kind of feeding. And I know that a lot of, I've worked predominantly with women. I don't want to exclude men, but I work predominantly with women. But I know that a lot of women who also grow up in Jewish cultures really struggle with food because every single holiday is surrounded by food. There's a specific food to eat. You're either eating it or not eating it or fasting from it.
And we have so many holidays, right? There's like, we have 12. I mean, there's no break. Yeah.
Yeah. And then if you celebrate the Sabbath, you have like that whole experience every single week. And so, regardless of if someone is listening to this and they're Jewish or not, I find that religion does play a huge role also in our relationship with food because of what we are taught about what is normalized and what we should eat or not eat, or if you're having traditions of fasting and what kind of messages that sends to your body of like, okay, food is bad. Now, on this particular day, I'm supposed to not eat it. And why? And that can be really confusing for a child that maybe isn't fully explained around like, there's a religious reason for this and no food is not bad. And, we're fasting for this reason. And also you don't have to. Let's also make it a choice. I know in Judaism with Yom Kippur that if you are navigating some kind of sickness or have a history of an eating disorder, it actually isn't appropriate to fast. And so, we just kind of have to get really, really curious about all the many different messages that we receive. And it can be from our family. It can be from the cultures we grew up in and the religious, aspects that we grew up in, and be like, okay, what has informed my relationship with food? I find it's a really great place to start. If someone's listening, like break out a journal and be like, okay, from the moment that I can remember, what are all of the messages that I've received from my upbringing, from my culture, from my surroundings, from diet culture, from my religious upbringing around what it means to have a relationship with food? How has food been described as good or bad? How has it been put in kind of an all or nothing thinking? And you get to start to see that, oh, your present day food behaviors, they make sense based off of all of the messages you received. And also, let's bring this around to, I call it food fawning. It's kind of a term I came up with a couple years ago. And so fawning is a kind of a trauma response that when we feel like, previously it was always called people pleasing. We know now that actually a tendency towards people pleasing can be a trauma response called the fawning response. And what can happen is if you got the feedback from your environment that you needed to put everyone else first for you to feel safe, because if you didn't put someone else first, you either were physically, emotionally, actually in danger, you would get punished, something bad would happen, that you learned, okay, if I just put everyone else first and I make sure that everyone else is okay, or I appease the person that I feel threatened by, then I get to feel safe. And that can also translate over to food. And it can happen a lot in different cultures and religious upbringings, that it's like, even if you were mentioning before of like, okay, you know that a food doesn't resonate with your body, but you keep eating it anyway, or you go to your grandmother's house and they're like, here, eat this, and you don't feel like you can say no. What's happening there is actually a trauma response where this food fawning happens of, okay, if I eat this food, even if it doesn't work for my body, I'll be appeasing that person and then I'll be safe. And it doesn't have to make logical sense. at this point, that's what you learned as a kid. Even if you're around someone that you know that you are safe around, they are not going to, yell at you or do anything bad if you say, actually, I'm really full right now. I don't need any more food, but thank you so much for offering. It doesn't have to make logical sense because this is coming from your body and this is coming from a survival response. And so you may eat foods that don't resonate with you, eat past hunger and fullness cues because you are trying to appease those around you. You're trying to make sure you also stay like you feel like you're going to belong. So you may even go to restaurants that there isn't really much there that you can eat that's going to resonate with your body, but you do it anyway because you want to go along with everyone else. And that's where we kind of have to come more into less focus about what's happening with food and more into what's happening inside of you. That there is so much fear and terror in saying no. It actually feels like your life is in danger to say no to this food.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Another piece on this kind of Jewish generational piece here.
Sure.
Because I feel like there are these two very conflicting narratives that I at least was handed down quite generously as a Jewish woman. The first one is, God forbid you should be hungry, right? You should absolutely eat all the time, and especially if it's something I made. The second thing is women need to be beautiful and you need to be appealing. And a lot of the things that you're talking about the safety of being in your body, essentially inhabiting it fully, participating, is almost like you're giving up the idea of being an object to be looked at and being a participant. And when I think about that transition from object to participant, there's like a bittersweetness to it. It's almost like giving up the fantasy. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that idea.
I completely agree with it. And what you're also pointing out is that, so in the body image realm, I really am very passionate about trying to update body image recovery field work because I feel like we continue to miss the mark. It's all based on, body positivity, which is a great movement. It's moved, the body image field along so much. So I don't ever want to kind of diminish any contributions that any of these movements have made. But it continues to keep the focus on the body. And that, things like people feel like they come to me and they feel like they need to have body love or body acceptance. They need to find some place where they can unconditionally love their body. But to be alive isn't meant to, you're not a body. You exist in a body, but your purpose here isn't to be a body that looks a certain way. And so I find that when those body image concerns increase, it is also information of what is happening inside of us. So when you start to hear, if you're around your family and you're I totally get that. Growing up, it was the first thing that my family would comment on. How did my appearance change? Oh, yeah. Have I gained weight? Have I lost weight? So it made sense that I was drawn towards diet culture really, really, really young because I was like, okay, if I'm going to stay in this family, I'm kind of getting the message that I need to look a certain way. So I better make that happen. So they continue to show up for me. And, I like to kind of bring in that we receive overt messages where people are telling you overtly, you need to lose weight, or you should really be conscientious about the way you look, or you should wear these clothes, overtly telling us. And then there's covert messages. And these are the messages that we observe but aren't told to us overtly. So it's kind of like those dialogues that you hear your parents commenting on other people's bodies. You're around your mom and her friends and they're like, oh, did you hear so-and-so gained weight? Or did you see what so-and-so was wearing? And you pick that up and you're like, okay, if I don't want people to talk about me behind my back, that means I can't look these certain ways, wear these certain clothes, do these certain things. So it's these covert messages that you receive and integrate and creates kind of this inner blueprint for yourself around how your body image should look. So when we're talking about, getting curious about body image, it's okay, when these start to increase, usually what is happening, and I explore this a lot with those that I work with in my programs and one-on-one, is I haven't seen a lot of people worry a lot. It can still show up in about how their body looks when they feel safe and they're living in their parasympathetic nervous system. So the parasympathetic nervous system is your state of safety and connection and rest and digest. Body image concerns decrease drastically when we feel safe to be here as we are. So we get to kind of see that, like, okay, if I am worrying about my body, rather than continuing to stay stuck in the story, we want to disconnect from the story and connect with the state. Okay, what's been going on in my life recently? Oh, was there just a Jewish holiday and I was around all my family and that felt really activating and triggering to be around all of them. And I've been in a fight or flight response since then. And of course, my body image concerns would be increasing because I'm finding some way to regulate, to feel safe, to stay connected to these people that I want to stay connected to, even though it feels sometimes really hard. And maybe I can do that through changing the way my body looks. And these connections and correlations get created really, really, really young. So that's where also, like you mentioned, IFS work, if we bring in parts work, sometimes in these moments, our inner child or inner teenager, they're really present with us and they are in the driver's seat. And they are starting to respond to the environment, not your present day self that is just like, wait a second, I know how loved and appreciated I am. And just as I am, and I don't really need to be worrying about the way my body looks right now. But we get to see that when body image increases, it is body information. An inner child is taken over and we are living in a dysregulated survival state. And then we get to work with that. Then we get to move the conversation away from, oh, I have to change my body or my body's not good enough. And it's like, no, this is just information. And how do I work with what's happening inside my body for my body to feel safe and regulated again so that my body image concerns will actually decrease all on their own.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And that's helpful. I'm thinking about, what you're saying is using it as data points, essentially. Like it's not about your body image.
I call
it's
it
a communication
body data.
that a younger part has taken over. Body data.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
GLP-1s have become massively popular and people are feeling in control and enjoying thin privilege and feeling like suddenly I can get full. All of these kind of really things that seem really miraculous for people that have struggled their entire life with eating and with their body image. What do you think about that? Using it as a tool, using it as a remedy, just the idea that there is some kind of external force or material, medicine that we can use that can shift the way that we feel about ourselves. And this is not the same as psychiatric medication, which can, it can take away some of the sensitivity towards certain things, but it doesn't get you, you're never rid of the thing that ails you. It's always present. It's just maybe at a lower volume. But GLP-1s, I've been seeing with some of the people I work with, it can really be a game changer. And I'm personally not sure how I feel about it. So I'm curious about your thoughts.
Yeah, I've worked with a lot of people who have considered them or are having a ton of people in their life taking them or on them. So first, I never want anyone to ever feel shame around what they decide to do or not do with their own body. This is your life. You get to decide what you want to experiment with. And I know for plenty of people, they're really tired of struggling with their body. They don't feel like internally, the felt sense, they don't feel like where their body is at feels healthy. And if we come back to this focus on health, not about trying to change our body to fit into a society that continues to shape and reshape what is the ideal body image over and over and over again, that's where it's like, okay, if you feel like you've really tried every single thing, I know people who really have done the work, so to speak, around showing up for themselves, doing the trauma healing. And I hate that I see a lot of somatic practitioners starting to connect with, and not that this can't happen, but that, if you just do the trauma work, you'll lose weight. And I hate that those two things are being connected because it continues to perpetuate a very harmful message that those that live in bigger or more curvaceous bodies, that there's something wrong with them. Like, you must have trauma that your body is holding onto, not just, this is just the way that your body is. and there's nothing wrong with your body just because it doesn't fit some thin ideal that like our culture created. It can be a little bit tricky when we're talking about GLP-1s. Of what I first like to explore if someone's considering it is first, why? What's the intention here? Like, where is this impulse coming from? Can we just first meet the impulse with a lot of curiosity, not see it as right or wrong or good or bad, but you're having this impulse for a reason. And, for those who are like, I've done the work, I've done everything, I am tired of struggling with my body, I don't feel like my body is healthy. I mean, originally the GLP-1s were created to help those struggling with diabetes. And so it
Yep.
is a medication that does help a lot of individuals manage that. So, I don't want to demonize something that has been, supported for so many people. But because it has become so popularized and it feeds into this thin ideal, if we kind of see that some of the body image movements, they keep bouncing back and forth. If you see the history of body image,
Yep.
that it kind of goes into, okay, we're moving forward, body acceptance, body neutrality, body respect. We're going to embrace all bodies. We're starting to see more body shapes and sizes and body diversity in marketing, in media, in TV shows and movies. And then it gets to this peak where it's like, okay, we are at a brink of really kind of finally embracing that everyone just gets to live in their body and be respected and like embrace all bodies, and all bodies are good bodies. And then it's like something happens and it's like, oh, this is too scary. It's kind of like a little bit like the trauma work where we get to a point and we're like, oh, I don't know if I can take the next step. This feels really scary. Let me go back to my familiar behaviors because that's what feels safe and known.
Exactly.
And then suddenly we're, I know a couple of years ago, like the New York Times came out with like heroin chic is back in. And then, now we're like a few years later, it's like we're back in the GLP-1 era. And so we're kind of going back into what we know, what feels familiar. And if we see that it actually is kind of, we get to this point that it's just unknown. What is it going to be like for a lot of women to not have to worry about their body anymore? If we actually take it away from what this is trying to do, is that women are powerful. Like women are, they're smart and they're wise and they have so much to contribute. And when we're focusing so much on our body and the way it looks, it keeps us quiet and it keeps us small and it keeps us focused on something that doesn't actually, I don't want to say doesn't need our attention, but it does kind of keep us distracted from maybe utilizing our voice in other ways. And sometimes that can feel really scary when you also have a past trauma and grew up in a family where your voice wasn't valued. So I do also like to normalize that we get drawn to specific body image things and diet culture because it also mimics a familiarity of a lived sense in our body. Both kind of diet culture and a trauma response feel very familiar. They keep us stuck in that sympathetic response. They diminish our voice, our sense of choice. And so it's like, oh, there's something about this dieting thing that feels like home. And it can kind of be like, oh, I know what this feels like. And we go towards what we know. Yeah.
That's an interesting thing about women when we're focused on keeping our bodies small and focusing on the way that we look. We're not as focused on using our voice and our gifts to contribute to larger issues. That's really true. And it's also, I'm thinking about, prior to getting married and having kids and the men that I was attracted to were the kind that would be just dismissive enough to keep me on my toes so that I had something to prove, and that would irritate the exact trauma of like, I need to prove my worth to you, right? It was really exciting for me. And I think about it now, it seems completely messed up to me, but I really understand that it was exciting because it was my thing, right? It was irritating the initial thing of my childhood. And I think that's the same thing with diet culture. I know it's not right. I know it's not good for me, but there's still something I can't let go of maybe I can have it this time. That's the exciting part of it. And I love the idea of looking at body data, as you call it, like as just information to guide us inward. And I followed Janine Roth's work for a long time, and she's kind of Women, Food, and God is a great book. And it's very intuitive eating heavy, which I struggled with because it was a little too loose for me and structure felt too restrictive for me. So I had to find my own way there. But she had this idea that you should incorporate foods which you have prior found triggering. Like she uses the idea of cookie dough and then, integrate it into your diet. So maybe with your lunch, you have 2 pieces of cookie dough. And I could never do that because I could never desensitize myself to the exciting feeling about that. The same way that I felt about, those men that I was attracted to way back that still possessed that quality that I found irresistible despite it being somewhat toxic. So it's this kind of fine line. We have to find our own path in this, which I find really sad in a lot of ways because we're not born like this, finding our way. We're such smart, intuitive creatures inherently. Like I look at my daughters and they know when their tummies are full and they know what they're craving and they know when they've had enough and they know when they're hungry. And it's kind of, unless I insert my own crap into it, I hope that they continue to follow their own bodies. But when we're exposed to all the information, you're going to hear a lot of times, I speak Hebrew as well. So I sometimes speak in 2 languages in my head. That's when I get like, it's like I'm buffering. But when we're exposed to all these messages from the media and from society and from our families, it's really hard to find what feels true to us and what is true in our bodies, which is where our body can't lie. And that was the really devastating part for me about binge eating, is you can't hide the fact that you've gained weight. So you're seeing my pain and it's shameful. And there was something about being thin but sad, which kind of, you're allowed to be sad if you're thin though, because at least it's, aesthetically appealing.
Yeah.
I love that you're doing this work. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to bring around the generational trauma piece is that what research also shows is that the more diet culture talk and the more, most of the research I've read is on mom, but it can be dad as well. The more that a mom speaks about her body image, what she's eating, what she's not eating, generationally, this gets passed down also from generation to generation around this is just what we're supposed to do. This is how I'm supposed to have a relationship with my body to fit into this family, is we criticize our bodies, we pick on our bodies, we stay on diets. And the more that just gets reiterated from generation to generation. So I also want to, again, bring in that compassion that this didn't start with you. If you grew up with a mom, she probably also grew up with a mom that was talking about her food and her diet. And so this also gets passed down again and again and again. And so, yeah, that is kind of how do we do the work to bring the focus back to ourselves, especially when, like you asked really early on in our conversation, like how do we teach our kids differently? I find that it first starts with ourselves, is noticing when you have the impulse to share something about, oh, are you sure you want to eat that? Or, are you sure you want to wear that today? And it's like, oh, let me pause. What's coming up for me right now? Why is that something that I want to say? What's happening inside of me? What are the internalized beliefs that are coming up for me right now? And so I find that that's actually where it starts, is the more that you kind of take that pause to check in with yourself first around like, why is that something that I would want to say to my child? You will start responding to your child differently, where they are just going to naturally get different messages, and you will be breaking this generational trauma.
Right. It's in the introspection and owning the voices that come up.
Yeah.
And just essentially not living with an automated response, which is usually the trauma response.
Yeah. Yeah. And having the dialogue sometimes and sharing with your kids, like, hey, here's what I grew up with. Like, just, you're allowed to be open and honest as, your children get older around, like, this is what I grew up with. These were the lessons that I were taught. And like, I don't want to teach that to you. Like, that is not the kind of relationship I would ever want you to have with food and body. And this is where I'm coming from, just so you know also, and have your awareness. This is also our lineage, is that we grew up in a family that is very heavily focused on food and body. And let's talk about it. Even again, just coming back to Judaism, like walking away from a family gathering and being like, how was that for you? Like, oh yeah, grandma said a lot about body image tonight. Did you notice that? Like, did that bring up anything for you? Just having those honest dialogues so that I know I was never really checked in with. So I had to create all of these interpretations and meanings all on my own around what this all meant. But I find that if we have just the openness to have the conversations, then the kiddo doesn't have to create their own meaning, because you get to have that conversation with them of like, yeah, that actually really didn't feel good. And it's like, yeah, that totally makes sense that that wouldn't feel good. You know, you don't have to take that on. Like, that's her stuff. And like, that had actually maybe nothing to do with you. And so then different meaning gets to be created, and that little person gets to then create a different kind of relationship with their food and their body for themselves.
Yeah. You know, I'm curious, where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Connecticut. But you know, most of my family is East, and you know, lives in New York and Maryland, and yeah.
Okay. And you're currently, where are you located now?
So I actually go back and forth between Colorado and Montana. My in-laws live in Montana, so I visit a lot, but I came out to live in Colorado for grad school, and everyone expected me to move back east, but I met my husband and we never moved back east.
Okay. It's gorgeous there. The little girl that you were in Connecticut, if she saw what you're doing now for a living, and the way that you're influencing people with your own narrative, your own story, and the way that you're helping primarily women transform the way that they look and treat their bodies, and the way that they live with food, their whole relationships with body and food, what do you think she would think about this?
I'm like already tearing up for you to even like ask me this question. I think she's the one who inspires me. You know, I share so many open stories of my childhood on social media, and I think it's really important, because I feel like I got into this work because I never wanted anyone else to feel so unseen the way that I felt growing up. And so yeah, I think she would feel proud, and she would feel excited that, you know, she's finally feeling safe to use her voice and to put herself out there and to have herself be known. And, you know, she continues to inspire me. I have a pretty strong relationship with her now. And while it hasn't always been smooth to connect with that younger self, you know, I see this a lot with those I work with as well, that when you start to connect with that younger you may have such a hate towards them, you know, of this, like, you were the problem, or I don't like the way you showed up, and I don't like the way you reacted. And it can be so hard to actually create a relationship with them. But I think the more that I looked at past pictures of myself, and I saw my light and my vibrancy and my fun and my playfulness, and I'm a little bit of a quirky person, and just kind of being like, I really love that about her, and that's still a part of me. You know, I think that having that relationship with her continues to inspire me of the work that I want to do today, and support others, and feeling like it is safe to come back into connection with their bodies, and to make that their home again. And then, you know, to be able to navigate food with much more ease.
I find that so moving, Stephanie. And, you know, I love that you're admiring that part of you, your younger self, and it has nothing to do with the way that she looked, or the way that, how much she weighed. Nothing. No.
Yeah.
Thank
it was
you
more
so
who she
much
was
for this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, we traversed so many different topics. So thank you so much for having me and having this dialogue. It's so important. And, you know, for anyone who has questions or wants to get in touch with me, support@stephaniemara.com is my email address. You can find me on Instagram @_Stephanie Mara, and like, please reach out. I love connecting with people. I could talk about this stuff endlessly. And so I'm just, you know, here for anyone who's looking for more support.
And that was my conversation with Stephanie Mara. It definitely brought up a lot for me. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have looked like if food and body hadn't eaten up, see what I did there, so many years of my life. And I love that she is giving us new ways to look at these relationships, to food, to our bodies. It's like a shame extraction procedure, and I am very much here for it. And if you want to learn more about Stephanie, all of her info will be in the show notes. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment or send me an email. This has been How Did You Get Here? I'm Maya Kruger. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.